Welcome back to LV Scary Stories, where we share the most chilling tales that will send shivers down your spine. In today's video, we dive into 3 eerie and unsettling stories that will leave you questioning the things that go bump in the night. From ghostly encounters to unexplained phenomena, these tales are as mysterious as they are terrifying. So, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and prepare to be haunted by these spine-tingling stories. Let's get started. Story number 1. My family used to live in Southern California in an apartment complex with a lot of Mexican and Vietnamese people back in the 1990s. I believe it was 1997 when we moved into that apartment. We were poor. My mother didn't work at the time because there were still a lot of us kids at home. My father was going to school and only working 30 hours a week at minimum wage. We ended up living in cheap housing. Looking back, that time in my life almost feels like a dream, especially the 4 months we lived in that apartment. I remember one night when ants started crawling on the wall in a long line. My father used a flashlight to try to see where the ants were coming from, since there were so many in the hallway. He followed the trail of ants into my sister Hannah's and my bedroom. He found the hole they were coming through, sprayed something to kill the ants, and then used hot glue to seal the hole. Later that night, Hannah and I were up late watching TV in the living room. I was getting tired and decided to go to bed first. When I went into our bedroom and turned on the light, I saw 2 legs sticking out from under our bed. The legs were wearing jeans and brown boots. At first I thought it was my father checking for ants again. But then I realized it couldn't be him. The boots were too big, and my father would never wear shoes in the house because my mom didn't allow it. I froze in fear for a moment before running to the living room to tell Hannah. Now we were both scared. We stayed in the living room, looking down the hallway at our bedroom door to see if anyone would come out. After about 3 minutes, nothing happened, but we were still terrified. We decided to wake up our parents and told them what I saw. My father went with us to check the room, but there was no one there. The window in our bedroom was locked still, and the closet was empty except for our clothes. One night, my mom woke up to the sound of someone rummaging through things in their bedroom. She thought it was one of my 2 little brothers, Michael or Benny, who slept in their room. She whispered, "Michael, Ben, is it you?" When she said this, the noise immediately stopped. She looked toward the bed where Michael and Ben were sleeping and could see, even in the dark, that they were both still sound asleep. She reached over to my father's alarm clock and pressed the light button to look around, but no one was there. Their bedroom door was still closed. She got scared but didn't wake my father for some reason. She stayed awake, and as she listened, she heard what sounded like someone walking in the hallway. Sometimes it even sounded like someone was grabbing the doorknob to their room. It was so strange. The next morning, she asked Hannah and me if we'd been up late, but we told her we hadn't. Thankfully, we didn't stay in that apartment for long before making the move to Wisconsin, where most of our relatives were. When my father went to make our last payment for the apartment, he talked to the lady working in the office. She was new to the job, but she told him that a while back a family had lived in our apartment. One night, a man from a nearby neighborhood broke into the apartment to steal something. The father of the family caught him still looking under the bed and shot him in the back, killing him. Because of that, the father ended up going to jail. That story sent chills down my spine. Story number 2. Back in the 1990s, my family and I used to live in the countryside, where we had a big yard surrounding our house. In the front, we had a large gate that we could open to park our car inside. Outside the backyard, on the sides and in the back, there was just an empty field. In the spring, the grass would grow tall and green, but by summer, everything turned yellow. Way in the back, there was a Mexican family that lived there. It was actually a butcher's place, and that family had many animals, including pigs, goats, cows, and chickens. I remember when our family first moved into that house. It was October. It wasn't hot anymore, so we decided to do some yard work and dig in the backyard. We cleaned up a lot so we could start planting fruits and vegetables in the spring. The following year, during the spring, our corn, sugarcane, and cucumbers were growing, and our backyard looked like a jungle. One night, my wife was inside cooking, while the kids were in the living room watching TV. I was outside in the backyard watering our plants. The sun had already set by then. I was on the side of the house, watering some onions, cilantro, and pepper plants, when suddenly, I heard a dog barking like crazy outside the backyard. I walked to the back and saw a man with his dog. He had a shotgun slung over his shoulder, and the dog was outside, barking at my fence as if it had chased something into my backyard. Then the man with the shotgun yelled, "Come on, boy, let's go back." The dog ran back, and they both walked toward the house far away, the one with all the land and animals. I figured he must have been the owner of that property. I went to grab my water hose from the side of the house where I'd been earlier and brought it to the other side. As I walked, I noticed something hiding behind one of the bamboo planters. I thought it might be an animal, so I used the water hose to spray water at it. I could see it moving behind the planter, so I kept spraying water. Then, all of a sudden it jumped up, stepped on my bamboo, and leaped over the fence. I couldn't get a good look at it, but from what I could tell, it had messy blondish brown hair and wore something white, like scrubs. I didn't see any arms or legs. The way it jumped over the fence was so strange. That thing wasn't an animal. I was scared but curious, so I went to check behind the planter. All I found were some chicken feathers and a bit of blood. Whatever it was must have gone over to the other house and killed a chicken. Maybe that's why the man and his dog were chasing it into my backyard. On Mother's Day, my wife and I were heading to the store. As we backed out of our backyard, I got out of the car to close the gate. That's when I noticed a black Chevy truck had just parked nearby. I saw our landlord and his 3 kids get out of the truck and start walking toward the empty field. When my landlord saw me, he waved, and I waved back. After that, I got back in the car and we drove off. I knew my landlord owned a lot of land in the area, probably all the land surrounding our house. At the time, I didn't think much about it. The next morning, as I drank my coffee and watched the sunrise, I couldn't shake the memory of what I'd seen the day before. My landlord and his kids had been carrying flowers, and it was Mother's Day. Curious, I decided to go out into the field. I followed a little dirt trail far back, about half a mile, until I came to an area under some trees. There I saw a grave. The headstone read, Becky Jensen, 1926-1987. I froze. My landlord's last name was Jensen, Mark Jensen. That was probably his mother's grave. I felt a chill, but I tried to act normal and walked back home. The house itself wasn't haunted, but I think the land was. We lived there for many years until the landlord decided to sell his property. To this day, I still don't know if what I saw that night was connected to the grave. Could it have been my landlord's mother? I've always thought it was. Story number 3. You've probably heard stories about families moving into a haunted house and then leaving just a few days later. That's exactly what happened to me and my family. Ever since I was little, I've had problems. Sometimes I would pee blood, and the doctor always said it was because of my kidneys. Fast forward to now, I'm almost 40 years old. One day I got so sick that I ended up in the hospital for a few days. Before they discharged me, they put a tube in my chest. They told me it was a dialysis tube, and the doctor said not to remove it. After I was discharged, I had to go to the dialysis clinic 3 times a week. At this point, I could no longer work. I had been at my job for a long time, and my boss was understanding, so I was able to take disability leave and stay home. We were living in an apartment on the second floor at the time, but it became a struggle for me. Going up and down the stairs made me feel like I was going to black out. Because of this, we decided to move to a small house near the railroad tracks in the rougher part of town. I remember our first night in the new house. We didn't hear anything unusual. The second day I went to dialysis while my wife went to work, and our kids were at school. When I got home, I was tired and hungry. I ate some stir-fry that my wife had made earlier that morning, but as I started eating, I felt something strange in my mouth. I spat the food into a napkin and saw a hair in it. I set the napkin aside and tried to keep eating, but after a few more bites, I gagged. This time, I felt a hair at the back of my throat. I used my fingers to pull it out. At first, I was angry, thinking it was my wife's hair. But then I looked closer. It wasn't black like my wife's hair. It was long and light brown. I tried to tell myself it was just one of her hairs that had started turning white, since she had a few gray hairs. Still, I stopped eating. Feeling exhausted, I lay down on the couch to watch TV and ended up falling asleep. I don't know how long I slept, but I remember hearing the door to the garage open. I thought it was my wife coming home. I heard footsteps walking toward me, then turning into the hallway. When I opened my eyes a little, I saw the clock. It was only 2 p.m. My wife and kids weren't supposed to be home until 4 p.m. Confused, I sat up and called out, "Babe, is that you? Are you home already?" There was no answer. Thinking maybe she was in the bathroom, I got up, but when I stepped into the hallway, I saw half a face peeking out from the bathroom door. It was dark, so I couldn't see clearly, but I knew it wasn't my wife. I thought maybe it was a homeless person who had snuck into the house. The face disappeared back into the bathroom. I turned on the hallway light and rushed to the bathroom door, but no one was there. I checked the bathroom and even the shower, but it was empty. I was starting to panic. I hadn't been able to pee normally in a long time because of my kidney problems, but at that moment, I almost wet myself. Scared, I went outside to smoke a cigarette and waited for my wife and kids to get home. That night, while my wife and I were sleeping, the light suddenly turned on at around 1 a.m. My 2 daughters came running into our room, crying and screaming. They said they had seen something in their bedroom, a lady with a pale face and rotted arms. I told my wife to stay in our room with the girls, while I checked on our 6-year-old son. When I opened his bedroom door and turned on the light, he wasn't in his bed. My heart sank. I called out for him, and that's when I heard his voice coming from the closet. I opened the closet door and found him hiding inside. When I asked why he was in there, he said he had seen someone sleeping in his bed with him. At first, he thought it was his mom, but then he realized it wasn't and got scared. I grabbed him and brought him to our room with the rest of the family. We locked the door and stayed there until morning. The next day, my kids didn't go to school, and my wife called in sick to work. We decided to move out and stay with my brother's family. Our church had planned to come and pray over the house that weekend, but by Friday, we had already moved all our things out. When we broke our lease, the landlord didn't charge us anything. He said he understood and wasn't upset since we had only been there for a short time and hadn't caused any damage. I asked him if he knew anything about the house's history. He said he didn't, but he mentioned that he had bought the house at a very cheap price in 2010 and used it as a rental property. However, he did share that a teenage girl had overdosed and died in the closet. It was the same closet in my son's room. After that experience, I swore I'd never rent another cheap property again. But at that time, my wife and I were struggling financially. I was on disability, and it was nothing compared to what I used to earn while working. Thankfully, after being on dialysis for a while, my kidneys started to recover. Eventually, the doctors removed the tube from my chest, and I was able to use the bathroom normally again. Nowadays, my family and I live in a better house, one that isn't haunted. That's all for this video. Thank you for making all the way through and supporting my stories. Have a wonderful day or night.